I'm gonna start this one out with an apology because my microphone is still not working. I think I just need to cave and buy a new one at this point, but that is a problem for another day. Hey people, how's it going? Today I am going to be super hyper and might be talking a little bit fast by accident because we finally got the trailer for The Witcher Season 4. It feels like we have been waiting forever, especially with how close we are to the release date right now. But I am genuinely so excited, and whilst I've made videos about TV shows before, I've never made one about this specific show because the fandom can be a little scary at times. However, this season I've decided I'm just going to do it anyway and hope for the best because I'm super excited. I want to talk about it. And because every time a season of this show has released, I've been kind of frustrated by how hard it is to find videos made by anyone who seems to actually enjoy the show. And so I figured why not be part of the solution to my own little conundrum and sharing that excitement. That said, if you are already thinking about leaving a comment talking about how much you dislike this show and it should be cancelled and blah 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 blah, maybe just stop for a minute and wonder why you're still watching videos about a show you supposedly hate 6 years after it first aired. And then think about getting a hobby. Anyway, I am very excited about the new season, and in this video I'm going to be going through my thoughts on the trailer, my predictions for season 4, and by extension possibly some of for season 5, and I'm going to base a lot of that on what we know so far and the trajectory of the last 3 books. As such, there will, of course, be spoilers ahead for the content of the books, so if you don't want to hear that and you're not interested in knowing what happens, then maybe this is not the video for you. Whilst you listen, you can also watch as I speed paint portraits of all the 4 main cast, although I am probably not going to talk about the paintings because this video is long enough already, and you don't need to hear me waxing poetical about Yennefer for 6 minutes long. That said, if you do want to know more about my art process, please feel free to ask me things down in the comments. I'd be super excited to share with you. Now, logically, I should start with Ciri, our fantastic main character, first. However, it would be foolish not to address the elephant in the room, and that is Geralt's recasting. I think we were all a little bit worried about this, even those of us who weren't super attached to Henry Cavill, because having the main character of a show recast this far in is a big deal. I know I was expecting that even if Liam was doing a decent job, that it was probably going to take a while to get used to the character having a completely different face. But honestly, watching that trailer, he just slips so seamlessly into the role that it barely even registered as strange to me. This new Geralt seems to have more of that clever wit and humour than his predecessor did, and I get the impression that we're really continuing towards the shift we saw in season 3 towards a more verbose Geralt who actually acknowledges that he has friends to lean on and, speaks to his companions. And I really love that. I also love the jacket he has. It gives much more of a rugged wanderer vibe than something like the season 2 armor, and is also just quite reminiscent of some of the book descriptions of Geralt. Overall, I just have to say I am a huge fan and I'm really happy with how this recasting has turned out. My only real concern with it is about whether the show is going to try and do something clever to acknowledge the fact that we've switched actors. Personally, I think the best move would just be to not acknowledge it at all in universe and just continue with the story from where we left off, perhaps with one joke or remark from Jaskier about Geralt having changed his hair or something. I could also see, however, the show utilising characters of Nimue and Condorimois, who appear in the books as historians at a time set long after the events of the story, and spend much of the books debating what actually happened to Ciri. Having the two of them maybe argue over Geralt's appearance might be a trick to sort of explain why he suddenly looks different, to kind of show that the story is being told through the eyes of these storytellers. However, I'm not a massive fan of this, as it also allows the potential for them to start retconning other parts of the story simply by blaming it on the narrators. And that could leave the audience really unsure of what actually happened. And retconning bits of your story can be really dangerous about the implications that's going to have on the narrative and the integrity of the plot. But if it is done carefully, that could also be an option. Personally, I'm not sure if these characters are even going to make it into the show, given there's only 2 seasons left and there's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen in that time, 3 books worth of stuff. And of course, we already have a character who fits nicely as a narrator, and once again, I think you could probably just explain this all away by having Jaskier make a quip. Speaking of whom, we can't talk about Geralt without talking about his company, also known as the Hansa, although I'm not going to call it that yet because the character who names it the Hansa has not been announced. We've gotten several glimpses of Milva, Regis, and Jaskier in the trailer, who, may I just say, looks amazing. I am loving the stupid, silly little scarf. and I am really looking forward to the dynamic between these guys. What little we saw of Geralt and Jaskier meeting Milva in season 3 was so good. I loved her character, and I'm really hopeful for more shenanigans, especially once we start adding in characters like Regis into this mix. In fact, the few pieces we got of Regis in the trailer have already cemented him as one of my new favourites. I was already a fan of the book character, but I am just loving this version of him. This guy's going to be so much fun, and I genuinely think they've cast him really well. There's currently no sign of an Angoulême casting announcement, but I am holding out hope that we will still get her in season 5. One of my favourite members of the Hansa. Admittedly, I like all of them, and it would just be such a shame if she was missed out of the show. But the trailer does confirm that which I already expected, which is that we're going to be following this group as they travel south in search of Ciri and try and fail not to get caught up in the war. There is, however, one member of the company who we do know exists and has been cast and has appeared in previous seasons, but who is mysteriously absent from the trailer. And that's Cahir, who in the books joins Geralt's company as he's also searching for Ciri on account of the fact that he keeps having dreams about her. My suspicion is not that Netflix has strayed from the storyline and cut Cahir out of the company in the Hansa, but instead that they've carefully cropped him out of scenes in the trailer. In fact, I think I can see his horse in the edge of one. I also think I can see him stood behind Jaskier in one of the crowd scenes. And I think they've done that because they think that Cahir joining the company is probably going to be a bit of a twist for non-book readers. And they're probably right. And they want to avoid spoiling this twist before the show airs. Hence why no Cahir. I think the introduction of Cahir could be particularly interesting as well, because the nature of screenwriting means it's a lot easier to switch perspectives than it is in a book. And as such, Cahir is a lot more fleshed out in the TV show, because in the books he's only seen through the eyes of Ciri and also Geralt when he meets them on Thanedd, and Ciri is terrified of him. The audience of the show, however, have seen much more of his internal struggle to find purpose and what he's been doing behind the scenes, and I think it can make for a really juicy redemption arc of sorts for him. It's also notable that in the show, Jaskier has already met Cahir as well, working as the Sandpiper. So at that first meeting that he's going to have with the company, we already have another perspective on him instead of Geralt's perspective of Cahir as the monster from Ciri's nightmares. Now, whether Jaskier will show the same compassion and forgiveness for Cahir as he did for characters like Dara in season 3, I doubt it. But it would certainly be interesting to see how these subtle changes that have happened throughout the series are going to affect this meeting. It's also very interesting to consider that Cahir is the only character, besides Emperor Emhyr, who knows that Emhyr is Ciri's father. I'm not entirely sure whether the writers even remember this, because every time I rewatch season 3, it surprises me again that scene that exists where Emhyr told him this piece of information. However, it could have very interesting storytelling potential if he shares this information with the Hansa, or alternatively, if he chooses not to share it. Also, side note, but in my book reread that I was doing kind of on the run up to this, I did only reread Baptism of Fire, I'll admit. I realised that they find Cahir trapped in a coffin, and Regis is hiding in a literal grave, and I'm very glad to see that they seem to have kept the graveyard detail in at the very least, because I just find it really funny that they found a vampire in a grave. I'm also looking forward to seeing Geralt travelling in a group for once. I think the company represents an opportunity to really dig into Geralt's character and understand the nuances and flaws of him better in a way we couldn't really with the near silent grumpy Witcher we had in the first 2 seasons especially. I think seeing him play off a variety of characters over multiple episodes will just be a really nice change of pace. The books actually make a lot of use of prophetic dreams, especially in Baptism of Fire, which is the book obviously set right after Thanedd. And Geralt, Cahir, and Jaskier all experience these, with Geralt and Cahir dreaming about Ciri, and Jaskier having a nightmare about being hanged. In Geralt's piece specifically, I'm wondering if maybe these dreams will be used to show more of his internal thoughts and struggles, and also as a fun tool to maybe allow him to have some more scenes with Ciri, even if it's just a dream Ciri. We do have one promo photo that shows Geralt and Ciri sat together on a log that is almost certainly some kind of flashback or dream, and it looks really good, and the chemistry seems like it's probably decent, and I'm just really excited to see these two play off of each other with the new casting. Also hopefully going to get a lot more of his friendship with Jaskier, which I'm really looking forward to, because meeting the company and the Hansa is really going to cement theirs as a old and well-tested friendship with a lot of trust in it, especially in comparison to all of these strangers and Nilfgaardian adjacent knights and vampires, etc. I'm also just hoping that we'll get more Jaskier in general, given that he should be in most scenes with Geralt in them, given that they're now on the same journey. The trailer didn't give us much insight into what, if any, specific storylines Jaskier will be getting for himself this season, besides his role as Geralt Confident, but personally, I am really hoping we get a solid continuation of his romance with the prince, now king, Radovid, from last season. At the end of season 3, the audience discovered that Radovid was trying to run away with him before his brother was murdered and he was crowned king. Jaskier doesn't yet know either of these things, and whilst I don't think he's likely to find out about Radovid running away, I am very interested to see what happens when he finds out about him now being a king, as opposed to just a prince. Radovid and Jaskier are definitely a bit of a dark area in terms of predictions, though, as obviously this version of Radovid doesn't exist in the books. And throughout the rest of the books, Jaskier never actually returns north of Sintra because they're walking their way into Nilfgaard. There was also no sign of Radovid in the trailer, but neither was there any sign of Dijkstra or Queen Maeve or any of the other major political players who we'll talk more about later. So I think this is just an editing choice to kind of push the action scenes, rather than a sign that he's going to have a smaller role this season compared to last season. There has been sign of the Northern Army camp, however, which looked like it was on fire in the trailer, meaning there are strong odds we're going to be seeing Geralt company cross paths with Maeve and finding themselves running from the threat of conscription at several points this season, which is likely going to lead to Geralt and Jaskier's temporary capture. And also some fun and interesting fight scenes, all, stuff taken straight out of the books, basically. My guess is the season will probably culminate with the battle at the Yaruga River, leaving Toussaint and Assault of Steep Castle all for season 5. But obviously, I can't be sure about that, I'm just guessing. I'm hoping we also get some new songs again. We got 3 last season, all of which I love, and so I'm really hoping for more again in season 4. Although, admittedly, I don't think Yaski is likely to be anywhere where he can perform to an audience, so perhaps we'll get some more softer and reflective ones. All in all, I think that Geralt's company is one of the things I am most looking forward to next season, purely because of the group quest dynamics of it. However, until we get a casting announcement, I will continue to worry about Angoulême because she's feral and I love her, and I am aware that season 5 is quite late to introduce a new character, so I continue to be afraid. So, after that rather large opening section, I feel like it's only right we move on to our main character, and the whole entire reason Geralt is travelling to Nilfgaard, and that is Ciri. And we were fed with Ciri content in that trailer, to be honest. I think her new design looks incredible, and we got some amazing fight scenes. Not to mention, I think the trailer revealed a lot about her story arc as well. At the end of season 3, she joined the Rats, and whilst I did get a glimpse of what I think is the Rats' fight against Leo Bonhart in the trailer, my suspicion is that that scene will be from the end of the season, and that season 4 is going to follow Ciri as she travels with the Rats from start to finish. Essentially, travelling without any parental supervision for the first time since just after the fall of Sintra, although she's grown a lot, obviously, since then. The trailer has a number of scenes that I think clearly demonstrate her kind of shifting mental state throughout the season. There's a quote near the end in which she says, "Saving someone is the most important job," which very clearly reflects the things that Geralt has taught her so far, and it's fairly clear to anyone who knows anything about the Rats that this is likely in direct opposite to their entire existence. Ciri claims the name of Falca at the end of season 3 and supposedly gives up on her previous identity. It would seem that she's still initially holding on to a lot of those memories of her time with Geralt, and those morals quite strongly. However, a different scene with Missile has her instead saying, "Always lost, never found," which is a direct inversion of the mantra that her family have been saying to each other for the last 2 seasons straight. My guess is that Ciri is really going to be wrestling with that feeling of abandonment that was touched upon in the desert scenes in season 3, and with the Rat's influence over her, I can see her deciding that she can't trust anyone but herself, and becoming kind of deeply self-preserving, self-isolationist, only looking out for herself, at least as far as the rest of the continent is concerned. Of course, there is a chance that we're actually going to witness the opposite character arc of this instead, and start from a position in which she's already become very dead inside and under the influence of the Rats, and is then going to slowly break away from that as the story progresses and return to her roots with Geralt and Yennefer, despite them not having found her yet. And on top of all of that craziness, which is probably going to have a major influence on how it exactly plays out, she's also processing the loss of her magic and having committed her first murder, and I suspect many more murders as the season continues. So, needless to say, I don't think Ciri's going to be having a great time this season. And speaking of Ciri not having a great time, I feel like we need to address the Ciri Missile relationship. To be honest, I think Netflix are going to have a real challenge on their hands dealing with this, and I'm still not entirely sure how I want them to go about it. I also suspect that my opinions that I'm forming at the minute may be slightly controversial, so I'm just going to warn you now. In the books, their relationship has a very questionable beginning, to say the least, in which Missile coerces Ciri into sleeping with her right after saving her from Kaylee, who was trying to do the exact same thing. But despite the way their relationship began, Missile clearly becomes deeply important to Ciri, as even in the very final chapter of the entire book series, when Ciri imagines a perfect future where everybody got to live and everything turned out perfectly, she takes special care to mention Missile being there, referring to her as my Missile. Also, I've just realised I'm really sorry. If her name is actually meant to be pronounced Missile, I I don't know. I've never heard it out loud. So, whilst we miss some of the development of that relationship in the books, it kind of just cuts to them already being together. It's clearly something very fundamental to Ciri's story and Ciri's character and has a really long lasting impact on her. Now, the reason I'm questioning what Netflix will do about them is because I also think their relationship suffers a bit in the books from written by a straight man in the 90s syndrome, in a way a lot of the women in the book series do at various points, and also suffers from the kind of subtle homophobia that's shown by most of the characters they come across, which obviously will not be happening in the series because so far in the series there has been a general wide acceptance of homosexuality shown through interactions with Amir and the dwarf Smithy in season 3, the barkeep who hits on Yennefer, all that sort of stuff. And whilst people have mixed opinions on the ways in which the writers of the show have changed details from the books and edited things, one thing that I think they have done excellently and consistently is the way in which they've rewritten a lot of these female characters to make them more believable, remove a lot of the misogyny in the writing, things like taking out Ciri's complete obsession with virginity that she has in the first few books, and also the way in which they've brought more diversity into the narrative, both through castings and just, things like Jaskier's bisexuality. And so it wouldn't surprise me massively if they did rewrite parts of this Ciri and Missile relationship in a few places. And I can see a version in which they do rewrite the beginning to be a lot less one sided and harmful. On the one hand, sexual assault and harassment are very serious topics, and to erase them from the story could come across as rather disrespectful and feel like a bit of a cop out of the show having to deal with more difficult issues. On the other hand, the book never really deals with the fallout of this because Ciri has so much other trauma she's dealing with, and this kind of never comes up again. So, removing it from the story doesn't actually lose much in terms of character development in the way you might think. They definitely could still have a very codependent and potentially toxic relationship founded in all that trauma bonding they're doing, without that coercive element necessarily needing to be in there. I've been in two minds for a while about which of these scenarios would be better, and I may be leaning towards them rewriting it slightly, just because I don't think it's needed, and there are plenty of strong female characters in the fantasy genre who have had similar plot lines already. In fact, I'd say it's almost overdone at this point for women in fantasy specifically. I think it could be a much more impactful story to portray a more genuine relationship because that would make it impossible for anyone to deny that this mainstream Netflix show has a bisexual woman as the lead. However, I also think this is a deeply complex relationship, and choosing to keep the canon beginning from the books wouldn't necessarily be a bad choice if the show takes the time to deal with that and the development of their relationship in a more nuanced and detailed way than the books did. Essentially, I'm waiting to see what happens before I make my mind up because both options could lead to some really good storytelling or some clumsy mistakes. I think whatever they choose, though, I would like to see that relationship develop and see that connection appear in a way that we don't in the books. Because in the books, we just kind of get a cut from the end of Time of Contempt to the beginning of Baptism of Fire, in which suddenly, after everything that happened to her, Ciri is now in this relationship with Missile, and we don't really discover how that played out other than it's assumed that after that night they were together. And I think there's more development you could do, and I think there's definitely more you could lean into with that. Overall, I think it's going to be really interesting to see Ciri striking out on her own for the first time, being around other people her age for the first time since season one, and just seeing once again this group dynamic and how this group dynamic affects her, particularly when these are not the best people for her to have fallen in with. Whilst the rats are all teenagers, and therefore there is some level of they don't know better going on, they are all horrible people who do terrible things, and Ciri goes along with it. And the way that they change her has massive ramifications for her storyline and who she becomes as a person. Equally, what happens to them in the end of the series also has major impact going forwards. They're going to shape a lot of who she is in season 5 as we're running up to the finale of the show. I think there's just some really interesting character potential in here, and I'm really looking forward to it. We saw in season 3 in the desert scenes that Freya Allen can absolutely carry an entire episode on her own, so I'm really interested to see what she does now that Ciri as a character has more freedom to work out who she is. Next, I want to talk about Yennefer, who is arguably the most unpredictable character in season 4, given that she spends most of the equivalent books trapped inside a little jade statue by Francesca. Now, obviously, I'm really glad she is not trapped and will get to actually have agency and her own storyline this season. But it does raise the question of what will that storyline be? At the end of season 3, Yennefer seemed to be stepping up to lead the remaining mages after the death of Tissaia in what I presumed would eventually turn into the Sorcerer's Lodge. And the trailer seems to confirm this, however, with a slight twist. In the trailer, Yennefer talks about raising an army to challenge the one being raised by Vilgefortz. And following this, we get glimpses of training scenes, specifically between her and Francesca, the Elven Queen. What's interesting is in the back of this scene, we can see both Lambert and Cohen, suggesting that Yennefer has decided to turn to the remaining witches for help. How she convinced the witches, who are notoriously wary of strangers and did not meet Yennefer under the best of circumstances, to aid her or break their neutrality, I'm not entirely sure. Although it is notable that in the books, Cohen does break his neutrality of his own accord and joins the Northern Army to help try and reduce the losses of the war. Prior to the trailer release, I was expecting a big part of Yen's storyline to involve fighting Philippa for control of the lodge. And whilst the trailer does confirm her presence among the other sorceresses, I'm starting to doubt my initial assumption. In the books, Philippa is actually the one to found the lodge in the absence of Yennefer, and while she's fairly committed to Redania in the show so far, I'm not actually expecting that to last much longer for reasons I will discuss in a later part of the video. Both her rivalry with Tissaia and, by extension, the Old Brotherhood, as well as her primary motivation of power, make the lodge a really obvious play for Philippa. Given the more military focus of the lodge, however, I'm now instead wondering if Philippa might actually be working with Yennefer rather than against her, as a major army would definitely be an asset to the rest of the northern armies and, by extension, Redania. However, Philippa has always had her own agenda, and so I doubt she'll be playing nicely all season. I can also see Fringilla taking a major role in the Sorcerer's Lodge, because whilst in the books we're first introduced to her through the lodge itself, in the show we've had her for a lot longer, and like Cahir, we've seen much more of her journey and development as she's turned her back on Nilfgaard. Her uncertain allegiances would also work as a strong deterrent against Yennefer doing too much portaling around to help Geralt and the Hansa, given that portals can be tracked, and if Fringilla is involved in the lodge, Yennefer will feel watched and she will feel anxious about doing too much portaling in case Fringilla tracks her. Which does help to clear up some potential plot holes that might spring up if and when Yennefer does choose to visit Geralt. Although personally, I'm not too worried about said plot holes because I think the annoyance of the plot holes is massively outweighed by the opportunity to see the new Geralt interact with Yennefer and see what their chemistry is like together. And if that involves some questions springing up of why didn't they just portal to Nilfgaard, I can cope with that. The final character of note in the lodge is Francesca, whose presence might seem unlikely given that she's had little to do with any of the other mages so far. But when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. After discovering Emir killed her daughter, she won't rely on Nilfgaard to protect her people, and so is likely turning to other avenues to keep them safe. That said, her husband did die in the fight against the Brotherhood, and it is unclear whether Francesca still holds the rest of the sorceresses responsible for this. Admittedly, it was Tissaia who killed him, so I think the fact that Tissaia is gone is probably going to help, but it'd be interesting to see how that relationship is going to develop given everything that went down. chance that Francesca is still after Ciri, who the Lodge spends a lot of time hunting in the books, and as such, the Lodge might be a useful resource for her if she's trying to find Ciri so that she can get her people off the continent. I also wonder if she might be partially responsible for training the Lodge in traditional non-magical warfare alongside the Witchers, given that she's led the Scoia'tael for so long as a general and queen, and so probably has a better understanding of a battlefield and of war tactics that monster hunters who are used to kind of one-on-one or one-on-two fights might lack. If I'm right about Fringilla's involvement in the Lodge, things could also get pretty interesting between her and Francesca because they have that very awkward relationship where Francesca is maybe Fringilla's only real friend, excluding potentially Cahir. And Francesca hates her guts because of the whole baby murder thing. Their relationship has been really interesting to me so far, and I would like to see more of it, so putting the two of them in the same place could be a really great opportunity for that. I also want to quickly address that in the trailer there did seem to be some major fight happening between a number of the mages and Vilgefortz. Season 4 feels a little early for such a big confrontation, and so I'm wondering if this fight might lead to Yennefer's capture and imprisonment in Stygia Castle, which happens in the books and is what draws Ciri there, instead of her just getting kidnapped whilst investigating Julian Pavetta's death, as it happens in the books. If this is the case, it could have a substantial effect on the state of things at the beginning of Season 5, but obviously I'm just guessing and speculating here. As much as the trailer was super exciting and did give us major insights into what Yennefer's up to this season, we didn't get a lot of detail, and obviously I can only guess because she's not in the books. About the Lodge, however, definitely veers into talking about the wider continent and the political situation of that. And that means talking about Redania and the Redanian intelligence. Unfortunately, there were no sightings of any of the Redanian lot in the trailer besides Philippa, nor was there any sign of any other major political players such as Queen Maeve, Emperor Emhyr, or glimpses of other northern monarchs. My guess is this is because action sequences just mark it a lot better and edit better for a trailer, and since a lot of the continent politics merely provides context for the world of Ciri, Yennefer, and Geralt, you don't really need the context for the sake of the trailer. Equally, it might give away too much about the detailed plot. That said, the political element of The Witcher is a major part of why I love the show, and so I want to talk about it anyway and tell you my theories based on, just extrapolating what happened in Season 3. So, first, we're going to start with the Redanians. I strongly suspect that Season 4 is going to explore the fracturing and potential fall of Redania. And, of course, the knock-on effect that will have on the continent and the war effort. At the end of Season 3, Philippa not only fractured the very fragile trust and alliance between herself and Dijkstra by choosing to assassinate King Vizimir without telling him, but also made another potential misstep in her plan, as whilst Vizimir disliked her personally, he was stupid and easily manipulated. Radovid, on the other hand, is known to be intelligent, insightful, and is fully aware that Dijkstra and Philippa were behind the death of Queen Hedwig, although it's unclear whether Dijkstra told Philippa that he'd revealed this to Radovid. Either way, it's not going to take Radovid long to figure out that Nilfgaard are not responsible for the death of his brother either. I suspect Philippa might at first try various tactics to control him. He's already been shown to be pretty susceptible to death threats. But given Dijkstra hates Radovid, and Radovid hates both of them, I suspect it's only so long before something about that dynamic between the three of them implodes and everything falls apart. Especially if Philippa's attention is then further divided by the Lodge, which would have Dijkstra questioning her priorities. Given Redania is the most powerful kingdom in the north following the fall of Cintra, this could potentially have a catastrophic effect on the war effort. Although the extent of that I can't guess, because obviously if it has too catastrophic effect, suddenly Nilfgaard take over everything and that's the end of the series, which is obviously not the direction they want to go in. We do also have to at least consider the possibility that Radovid is about to go completely off the rails. I know a lot of people have theorized he might be about to become some sort of major villain similar to his counterpart in the video games. However, this isn't something I'm particularly concerned about. Firstly, the show is very much based on the books, not the games. In fact, they do not have rights to the games. And in the books, all we get is a vague illusion that when Radovid's book counterpart finally became king, he arrested the members of his council who turned on him and his mother, which isn't really evil so much as practical and arguably kind of justified. I also think that the writers went out of their way to ensure the audience knew that Radovid was well-intentioned when they wrote his conversation with Vizimir at permission to leave and go and help Jaskier. If they'd wanted to write a Radovid who was about to turn evil, I think they would have left that much more ambiguous so the audience weren't sure whether or not he actually intended to keep his promise to Jaskier and whether any of his feelings were genuine. Of course, if Radovid did become some evil tyrant, it would definitely reinforce the idea that the Northern Kingdoms are deeply flawed and also have major consequences for the political landscape. It could add more nuance to the situation rather than the vague illusion we get to Nilfgaard are the bad guys, therefore the North must be the good guys. But I feel like there's been enough done in the series already to prove that the North are not good. And like I said, I don't think evil Radovid is particularly likely. We're also hopefully going to see more of Queen Maeve in Season 4. She appeared briefly in Season 2 at the Council of the Northern Kings, but should hopefully have a greater role in Season 4, as in the books she leads the Northern Army. Of course, Redania's lack of a king in the books probably contributed to her greater role, so we might see a slight shift in that in the show. But to be honest, Radovid does not seem like the military type, so I suspect Maeve will remain in control. In the books, Maeve has particularly fun interactions with Geralt, given that she's the one who knights him, making him officially Geralt of Rivia. But then, unfortunately, does try to conscript him into the army, which forces him and Jaskier to stage an escape from the Northern Army camp, which may very well be the burning tents scene in the trailer. I'm hoping we'll get to see her cross paths with Radovid in his role as king as well as also potentially Hansa, Foltest in some capacity, as I think we get some really interesting character interactions from seeing all the Northern Kings together, but actually having to do something for once. I'm also pretty sure that Gareth David Lloyd has been cast as Maeve's right-hand man, Reynard, which is not a dynamic I ever cared about massively in the books, but if you've been around this channel for a really long time, you'll know I'm a massive Torchwood fan, and so I'm very excited about that casting. As for the other side of the war, the trailer very much frames it as Vilgefortz raising an army, which would make sense given that at the end of Season 3, he's shown stood by Ymir's side, making their alliance very clear and plain to see. However, for those who've read the books, we know that Lydia's statement that Vilgefortz works with Nilfgaard, not for Nilfgaard, is very true, and he absolutely has his own aims and ends. Which is why I thought I'd bring up an interesting thing I noticed the last time I watched episode 8 of season 3. Because when Terran arrives at the Nilfgaardian court as the fake Ciri, there's a moment before Ymir takes her hand that he looks over at Vilgefortz, who nods in return. Now, this could just be a cue to the audience that they're scheming together, but I wondered rewatching it if this was actually Ymir asking for confirmation that this was in fact Ciri. He's obviously not seen her since she was about 4 years old, and whilst you'd imagine he should be able to recognise his own daughter, it has been a long time, and Terran was chosen because she looks similar to Ciri. It got me wondering if Vilgefortz not only lied to the court, but is also lying to Ymir about Terran's true identity, so that he can pacify him without giving up his chance to claim the real Ciri for himself. This is obviously a bit of a wild theory, but it could be possible, especially since Cahir is long gone, so Ymir no longer has anyone he can rely on or trust who would be able to recognise Ciri's face for him. Whilst talking about Vilgefortz, though, we should also quickly acknowledge that he has Istrid held captive somewhere, along with the Book of Monoliths. I imagine he'll be spending some time this season trying to get Istrid to open portals to other spheres, similar to in the Blood Origin series. Although to what end, I'm not entirely sure. Since both want Ciri for their own reasons, Vilgefortz will be in direct conflict with the Wild Hunt should he encounter them or their sphere. So I suppose this is one mystery I really will just have to wait for the show to release to help me gain some sort of insight into what's going on, because obviously the monolith didn't really fit into Vilgefortz's plans in the books. He mostly just wanted Ciri for the immense power that she possessed. Finally, however, I want to talk about the potential death toll in Season 4. Now, I want to preface this by saying it's entirely speculative. I know the Redanian Intelligence blog has released an article talking about a character death this season, but I have not looked at that article because that is a step too spoilery for me. All of my guesses that I'm about to share are based on books and my own gut instincts and kind of story pattern recognition things. If you do know who's mentioned in that article, do me a huge favour, don't put it in the comments because I'd like to keep some of the mystery. Equally, if you don't want to hear me talking about who I think is going to die this season, skip to the next bit of the video. The first and most obvious characters who are likely not going to make it to Season 5 are the rats. Like I mentioned earlier, the confrontation with Leo Bonhart appears to be in the trailer, and in the books, this confrontation is what kills all of the rats, save for Ciri. Killing the rats would definitely give an emotional gut punch to the end of the season, as well as setting up Ciri's character arc for Season 5. as she has to contemplate who she is, who she's become, and what she truly wants now that she is alone again. Now, other than the rats, I'm expecting the death toll to actually be quite low to non-existent, given we have a whole other season after this, and if it's anything like the books, I reckon season 5 is going to be the one that kills off the most characters. However, I do still have a few characters who I think might be in some danger, so I'm going to talk through those. My first potential death is potentially Istrid. Since Yennefer is spending most of the season hunting Vilgefortz, and Vilgefortz has Istrid captive, it could be a real twist of the knife if, in her failure to kill and capture Vilgefortz in time, Istrid gets killed as a consequence before she can rescue him. She was his first love, it's got an emotional tinge to it, and I have nothing to back this up, really, other than I think it would be pretty heart-wrenching, and Istrid isn't essential to the Season 5 plot, unless there's something with the monoliths going on that I haven't been able to guess, so killing him probably isn't going to create too many narrative complications going forwards. My next thought, and hear me out on this one because it's a bit of a stretch, is Dijkstra. If, as I predict, Redania falls in Season 4, then Dijkstra is likely going to wind up fleeing Redania under the threat of assassination, similar to how he does in the books. However, fleeing Redania with a whole season left of the show is going to put the audience on edge, waiting for him to show up again and cause trouble. In the books, he doesn't appear again until the very end when it's revealed he survived and is travelling as a pilgrim, with the implication being that he'll eventually weasel his way back into court. The problem with doing this in the show is obviously the end is the end of the season 5, and audiences tend not to trust characters have genuinely been defeated and won't return unless we actually see them die. The audience is going to wind up focusing on theorising about what happened to Dijkstra rather than other important plot elements throughout most of season 5, and so killing him on screen could be a really neat way to tidy up that plot. Plus, it would definitely be a shock to most, I imagine. But that said, it's all rather dependent on the collapse of the Redania falling a particular way and how that turns out. And even then, he's a fan favourite character. People might just get really angry if he dies. The final big consideration for me is the Witchers. Now that Vesemir, Lambert, and Cohen have been confirmed for season 4, I think there could be a chance that one of them also dies, given that they're a show addition and therefore not necessarily essential to the season 5 plot. It's also notable that Cohen does get killed in the books in one of the final battles, but moving his death forward wouldn't necessarily affect things too badly. That said, I think a Witcher death is the least likely of the options so far, and do the writers really want to kill another Witcher? I would say that arguably most of the characters in the show could be at some risk. Netflix obviously isn't afraid of killing their characters earlier on in their narratives than the books did, and whilst I doubt they're going to pull another Eskel and pull something really wild and unexpected and execute it quite as poorly as they did with that, they have done similar things killing characters early like Rians. Obviously the main cast have to survive to season 5, so they should all be completely safe, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm not expecting many deaths total, but they are definitely keeping us on our toes, I reckon. If it wasn't clear from this exceptionally ridiculously lengthed video, I am so excited about the new season. I think the trailer shows so much promise, and I can't wait to look back at it in a few months' time and see all of the clues and hints in the trailer that I definitely missed. It's absolutely insane to think that we are only 3 weeks away from the new season, especially given a month ago I wasn't even sure we'd get it this year. But I absolutely cannot wait. I do genuinely believe that in season 3, this show really seemed to start to figure out what it wanted to be and what direction it was going in, with those themes of family and friendship and the need to lean on each other in dark times really at the front and centre, as well as a massive shift towards more book accuracy plot-wise. And season 4 seems to be continuing that perfectly, which I'm super excited about. As always, if you have thoughts and theories of your own, I would absolutely love to hear them down in the comments. But if you've seen genuine spoilers or leaks, please do try and keep that comment section spoiler-free for everyone else's sake. If anyone is interested in me doing another Witchery video once the season comes out, or potentially a more compact, cohesive Season 3 recap video at some point before Season 4 releases, then please do let me know. This show is definitely on the fast track to becoming a major hyperfixation for me right now, so I would love an excuse to make more content about it. And without further ado, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye!